From a fighter jet that landed vertically on a moving ship in the middle of the ocean to the fastest aircraft ever built, outrunning the missiles fired to shoot it down to a ground attack jet that took a direct hit, lost half its tail, and still brought its pilot home. These aren't movie stunts. Every single one of these moments actually happened and caught on camera. Here are some of the most jaw-dropping things military aircraft have ever done. If you didn't see the footage, you simply wouldn't believe. On April 7, 2003, Captain Kim Campbell was flying her A-10 Warthog on a close air support mission over Baghdad during the opening days of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Her job that day was to protect ground troops taking heavy fire in the city center. The A-10, nicknamed the Warthog, is one of the ugliest aircraft in the US Air Force. It's slow, loud, and looks like something a child drew, but it was built for exactly one thing: to absorb punishment and keep flying, which turned out to be very lucky for Captain Campbell. As she rolled in over Baghdad, her aircraft was hit by a surface-to-air missile. The explosion tore through her right engine, shredded hydraulic lines throughout the fuselage, and punched holes in her tail section. Both hydraulic systems, the systems that control the aircraft's flight surfaces, went completely dead. Without hydraulics, an A-10 is essentially an unguided object falling through the sky. But the Warthog has a backup, a manual reversion system, essentially a series of mechanical cables, that allows the pilot to physically muscle the plane through the sky without any electronic assistance. It's brutally difficult to fly. The controls feel like pulling a truck with your bare hands. But it works. For the next 45 minutes, Captain Campbell wrestled her crippled jet over 100 miles of hostile airspace, bleeding hydraulic fluid the entire way before bringing it down at Baghdad International Airport. When she climbed out of the cockpit, ground crews counted more than 300 individual holes in the aircraft. The plane was repaired and flew again. So did Campbell. She received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Lockheed SR-71 Blackbird was the product of one of the most secretive engineering programs in American history. Designed in the late 1950s by a small team inside Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works division, it was built to do one thing: fly higher and faster than anything that could ever be sent to stop it. And it was fast. Officially, the SR-71 holds the all-time speed record for a jet-powered aircraft, Mach 3.3 or roughly 2,200 miles per hour. At that speed, the friction with the air heats the leading edges of the aircraft to over 600 degrees Fahrenheit. The titanium skin actually expands so much that the jet had to be built with gaps in the fuselage, which meant it leaked fuel while sitting on the ground. They solved this by simply letting it leak until takeoff, then aerodynamic heating would seal the gaps in flight. During the Cold War, the SR-71 flew hundreds of reconnaissance missions over denied territory. Enemy radar operators could see it coming. They could track it. They could even fire at it. They just couldn't catch it. The standard procedure for SR-71 crews when a missile was fired at them was not to evade. It was to accelerate. Over its operational lifetime, more than 4,000 missiles were fired at SR-71s. Not one of them ever hit. Every single aircraft and crew came home. The SR-71 was retired in 1998. No aircraft built since has come close to matching its speed, and to this day, the full details of many of its missions remain classified. On a clear afternoon somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, a pilot brought an F-35B to a hover about 150 feet above the deck of the USS America. Then, slowly, deliberately, he lowered it straight down like a helicopter. No runway, no catching wire, just raw thrust vectoring pointed straight at the ground. The F-35B is the short takeoff and vertical landing version of the Joint Strike Fighter. It carries a rotating lift fan behind the cockpit, driven by a shaft connected to the main engine that pumps 18,000 pounds of downward thrust while the rear exhaust nozzle rotates to point straight down. The result is an aircraft that can hover. What makes this almost comically difficult is that the F-35B is not a helicopter. It wasn't designed to hover. It was designed to fight. It weighs 35,000 pounds fully loaded. It flies at Mach 1.6, and it carries enough weapons to end a very bad day for whoever's on the receiving end. Getting a machine like that to simply stay still in the air requires the onboard computers to make thousands of micro-adjustments every single second just to keep it from falling out of the sky. When it works, it looks effortless. The plane just floats there, a $70 million piece of controlled impossibility hanging in mid-air. The first operational vertical landing of an F-35B at sea was completed in 2016. Since then, Marine Corps pilots have been doing it routinely, which somehow makes it even more extraordinary. The B-52 Stratofortress first flew in 1952. It's enormous, a wingspan of 185 feet, 8 engines, and a maximum takeoff weight of 500,000 pounds. It was designed to carry nuclear weapons across continents at high altitude. It was emphatically not designed to perform low-altitude aerobatics at air shows, which makes what happened at Fairchild Air Force Base on June 24, 1994 particularly difficult to watch. A B-52 was performing a practice run for the upcoming Fairchild Air Expo. The pilot began a series of increasingly steep bank turns over the runway, far steeper and far lower than anything the aircraft's flight manual permitted. On the final pass, the bomber entered a hard left turn at just 250 feet above the ground. The bank angle reached 65 degrees, then 80. Then beyond vertical, the aircraft rolled inverted and slammed into the ground less than half a mile from the flight line. All 4 crew members were killed. The accident became one of the most studied cases in military aviation history, not because of what the aircraft couldn't do, but because of what happens when a crew pushes a machine past the edge of its design envelope with no margin for error. The investigation changed how the US Air Force trains its airshow pilots forever. Today, every military demonstration team flies within strict computer-verified limits, and every maneuver is reviewed before it ever happens in front of a crowd. Modern ejection seats are remarkable pieces of engineering. In under a third of a second, an explosive charge fires a pilot clear of a stricken aircraft, a drogue chute deploys to stabilize the seat, and then the main parachute opens. Done correctly, a pilot can survive an ejection from almost any altitude. The word almost is doing a lot of work in that sentence. On a routine catapult launch from the USS Theodore Roosevelt in 1991, a malfunction sent an FA-18 Hornet off the bow of the carrier at dangerously low airspeed. The jet pitched nose down immediately. The pilot had perhaps a second, maybe less, to decide. He pulled the ejection handle while the aircraft was still essentially at sea level, nose pointed at the water. The Martin Baker ejection seat performed exactly as designed. The rocket motor fired, the seat cleared the aircraft, he was pulled from the ocean by rescue swimmers in under 4 minutes. Zero-altitude ejections pushed the ejection seat to the absolute edge of its design envelope. The parachute has almost no time to fully inflate. The difference between surviving and not surviving can be measured in feet. The pilot in this case was back in the cockpit and flying again within weeks. On the night of December 16, 1998, 2 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers lifted off from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Their target was Iraq. Their route would take them across the Atlantic Ocean, through European airspace, and into the Middle East. And then, when the mission was done, all the way back home. The round trip was over 30 hours in the air, non-stop, refueled multiple times mid-flight by KC-135 tankers. 2 pilots taking turns at the controls while the other rested in a small crew rest area behind the cockpit. At the time, it was the longest combat mission ever flown by any aircraft in history. The B-2 is one of the most expensive machines ever built, roughly $2.1 billion per aircraft. It's constructed with radar-absorbent materials and a flying wing design that gives it a radar cross-section about the size of a golf ball, despite being nearly as wide as a Boeing 737. When it arrived over Baghdad that night, Iraqi radar operators had no idea it was there. The bombs fell out of a clear sky with no warning. By the time anyone on the ground understood what was happening, the B-2 was already gone, turning back toward the Atlantic, 30,000 feet above the Mediterranean, invisible to everything below. Both aircraft landed back at Whiteman Air Force Base the following afternoon. The crews debriefed, got some sleep, and were cleared to fly again within days. Military aviation pushes machines and the people inside them to places that most of us will never go and will never fully understand. Every one of these moments happened because of years of engineering, months of training, and, when everything else failed, a pilot making the right call in a fraction of a second. The A-10 took 300 holes and kept flying. The SR-71 that outran 4,000 missiles. The F-35 hovering above a carrier deck in the middle of the ocean. The B-2 crossed entire continents without anyone on the ground ever knowing it was there. These aren't accidents. They're what happens when you build aircraft with enough capability and train pilots with enough skill that the impossible starts to look routine.